Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take that big pile of financial sources you've got. Could be anything from basic math principles all the way up to, complex strategic stuff, and we turn it into knowledge you can actually use fast.
Yeah, today we're really we're undertaking quite a comprehensive journey, I think. We're essentially building a financial toolkit right from the ground up.
Right.
Because, look, you simply can't make smart long-term decisions, whether that's about saving or borrowing or investing, until you really get a handle on the core math, the math that dictates how the value of money, shifts over time.
That's pretty much the mission then. We're setting out to decode these financial fundamentals, and we'll start with the real bare bones. Let's call it the linear world of simple loans, simple interest, simple discount. Then we kind of accelerate into the really exponential power of compounding and that critical concept, the time value of money.
Exactly. And then we bring it all together by applying that knowledge. We'll sort of shift gears from maybe personal finance into the corporate world, looking at those more advanced tools, ROI, NPV, IRR, that businesses use all the time to figure out if a big multi-year project is even worth investing in.
Okay, right. So let's unpack that a bit. We really need to focus on nailing down that crucial difference between INCHIM that's calculated just on the initial principal amount versus money that has to be valued across different points in time.
Absolutely. It's fundamentally the difference between, simple addition versus exponential growth, isn't it?
Okay, let's kick off with section 1 then, the foundation. When most people borrow money, especially for, say, a short period, maybe less than a year, they often run into loans based on either simple interest or simple discount. And, they sound really similar, like two peas in a pod almost. But the way they actually calculate the charge, the fee, it can have a dramatically different impact on your effective cost of borrowing.
Yeah, this is a really crucial distinction. And it's one that honestly often confuses people when they're first learning this stuff. They are fundamentally different in how that fee is calculated. And therefore, when the borrower gets the cash versus when they actually pay the fee. Hashtag 1.1 simple interest versus simple discount, a core difference. So with simple interest, the process is pretty straightforward. The interest, it's always computed based only on the original principal amount, that starting loan amount.
Right.
It's basically a flat percentage applied to that starting sum. Doesn't matter about the duration within the calculation itself beyond the t's variable. And we use that formula, I equals principal times rate times time.
Okay, so if I borrow, say, $25,000 at 12% simple interest for 8 months, the calculation is just fixed on that $25K, right? It's $25,000 times 12% times 8 divided by 12 for the months, which gives you $2,000 in interest.
Precisely. And the maturity value, that's the total amount the borrower pays back at the end of the 8 months, is always just the principal plus that calculated interest. F equals P plus I.
Right.
So in your example, the borrower pays back $27,000 total. And importantly, they received the full $25,000 cash right at the beginning. Simple interest is always paid at the end of the term.
Okay, that seems clear enough. But then the moment we start talking about simple discount, you're saying everything kind of flips.
It does, yeah.
This is where maybe the conversation gets interesting because the math seems to hide the true cost a bit.
Indeed, it does. Simple discount, you see, it's calculated not on the original principal the borrower receives, but on the maturity value or the face value of the note.
Yeah.
That's the total amount that's promised to be paid back at the end. And here's the real kicker, the calculated discount amount. It's deducted upfront.
Upfront, okay, that's the critical difference then. Simple interest is like an accrued fee you pay later. Simple discount is an immediate cost charged right at the start.
Exactly. Therefore, the amount the borrower actually receives isn't the face value of the note. It's what we call the proceeds, or sometimes the present value. And that's the face value minus that upfront discount. Right. And for the borrower, this has pretty major implications for the effective interest rate they end up paying, which is often actually much higher than the advertised discount rate.
Hang on, why is the effective interest rate higher? If the bank quotes me, say, a 10% discount rate, shouldn't I just be paying 10%?
Well, you are paying 10%. But it's 10% of the face value, the larger end amount.
Okay.
But the cash you actually receive and get to use, the proceeds, is a lower amount. So because your interest payment, which is the discount amount, is based on that larger face value, but the cash you're actually utilizing is the smaller proceeds amount, you're effectively paying more interest relative to the money you actually got to use.
I see. It's like the percentage is applied to a bigger number than the cash I walked away with.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And your sources actually highlight this. If the numerical rate for simple interest and simple discount are the same, say 10% for both, the actual dollar amount of interest earned under the simple interest structure is usually greater than the simple discount amount. But crucially for the borrower, the effective rate paid on the simple discount structure is higher.
Okay, let's make this really concrete.
Oh, yeah.
This is where choosing between these loan types genuinely hits the wallet, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We've got that comparison in our sources. A $250,000 loan, structured two different ways, both for 18 months at 10%.
Right. So scenario A, the $250,000 simple interest loan. Pretty straightforward. The interest is $250,000 times 10% times 1.5 years. That's $37,500 in interest.
Okay.
The borrower gets the full $250,000 cash up front. At the end of the 18 months, they pay back $287,500.
Okay, scenario B, the $250,000 simple discount note. Now here, that $250,000 is the face value, the amount due at the end.
Correct. So the bank calculates that same discount amount, $37,500, $250K, 10%, 1.5, but they calculate it right away and subtract it up front.
So the borrower only actually receives $250,000 minus $37,500, which is $212,500.
Exactly. $212,500 in proceeds.
Wow. Okay.
And the implication there is really stark. If you genuinely needed $250,000 cash right now, maybe to fund a business operation,
Yeah.
well, that simple discount note just failed you, didn't it?
Yeah, you're short $37,500.
You received $37,500 less cash than the face value you signed up for. And it all comes down to the basis of the calculation principle versus maturity value. It creates this, well, massive difference in the actual utility for the borrower. It's like an instant time tax almost. Hashtag tag draw not 1.2, the anatomy of a promissory note in discounting.
Okay, now let's bring in the actual physical instrument, or the legal instrument, rather, that often carries these calculations, the promissory note.
Right. A promissory note is, well, it's a fundamental legal IOU, really. It's defined as an unconditional promise, importantly in writing, to pay a definite sum of money. It has to specify the amount, the date, the payee. And critically, it must be legally enforceable. The term of the note is just the time period between when it's issued and its maturity date.
Got it. So if I issue, say, a $50,000 note at 12% simple interest for 120 days, I am basically promising the payee $50,000 plus the simple interest calculated on that.
Correct.
So the calculation, $50,000, 12%, 123.66.
Yeah.
Gives $2,000 interest. So the maturity value is $52,000. That's the debt I have to settle in 120 days.
Exactly. But what if the person holding that note, the payee, the one who's supposed to receive the $52,000, what if they need cash today? They're holding this piece of paper that's legally worth $52,000 in 4 months, but maybe they have an urgent need for liquidity right now.
Right.
And this leads us directly into a very common commercial practice called commercial discounting.
Okay. So this is where the simple discount concept gets applied by, say, a bank, even if the original note itself was written using simple interest.
Precisely. The payee, the holder of the note, essentially sells that future payment stream, the right to receive $52,000 later to a third party, usually a bank, before the note actually matures.
Okay.
The bank, then, is the one who will receive the full $52,000 maturity value later on. But today, they pay the seller the proceeds, and those proceeds are calculated as the maturity value minus the commercial discount applied by the bank.
Okay, let's follow that Mary Santos example from the source material.
Right.
She's holding that $52,000 note we just calculated. She decides, okay, 60 days before it matures, she needs the cash. So she takes it to her bank, and the bank offers her a 10% discount rate.
Right. Now, the bank, their focus is solely on the $52,000 they are guaranteed to receive in 60 days.
Okay.
So they calculate their discount based on that $52,000 face value using their 10% discount rate and the 60 days remaining until maturity.
So $52,000 times 10% times 63.60. Let me see. That's $866.67. That's the bank's discount.
Exactly. That's the bank's fee for providing the cash early.
So the bank subtracts that $866.67 from the $52,000 maturity value. And Mary Santos walks out of the bank with $51,133.33 in proceeds today.
Correct. And this whole transaction, it reveals a really complex interplay of value, doesn't it? Mary Santos originally earned $2,000 in simple interest on the note.
Yeah.
But by selling it 60 days early, she effectively sacrificed $866.67 of that potential gain just to get immediate liquidity.
Right. She paid a price for early access.
And the bank, they made $866.67 for basically advancing the cash and taking on the minimal risk for those 60 days.
So the connection for the listener here is it really shows you why the bank's discount rate is so powerful, isn't it? If the bank's rate had been, say, 20% instead of 10%, the proceeds Mary got would have dropped significantly more.
Absolutely.
She would have lost even more of her initial simple interest gains simply because she was impatient, maybe, or perhaps desperate for that immediate cash. It feels like a penalty for, impatience.
Well, it's maybe more than just impatience. It's also a reflection of opportunity cost from the bank's perspective.
Ugh.
The bank calculates their discount based on what they could be earning if they invested that same amount of money elsewhere for those 60 days. And that, right there, is probably the first small hint of the time value of money concept starting to creep into the picture, even within these relatively simple instruments.
Okay, so we've established that linear world of simple interest where the interest is always calculated on a fixed static principal base. Now we're kind of leaving linearity behind, aren't we? We're stepping up to section 2, the exponential power of compounding, which is really the engine of wealth creation, isn't it? And it's the necessary sort of precondition for valuing anything long term.
This is the really massive leap in financial understanding, I think. We're moving from simple addition to multiplication, effectively. The reason compound interest just completely dominates simple interest over time is because compound interest earns interest on both the original principal and on all the accumulated interest from the previous periods. The base grows. Hashtag Nanchag 2.1, compound interest versus simple interest, the exponential.
I think people intellectually get compounding, but they often don't really grasp the sheer magnitude of the difference it makes over a long period.
Yeah.
Simple interest, as we said, it grows by the exact same dollar amount every single period.
Fixed amount.
But compound interest, it grows by an increasing amount every period. The growth itself accelerates.
Yeah, let's maybe illustrate that quickly.
Yeah.
Imagine you invest, say, $10,000 at 5% for 3 years.
Okay.
With simple interest, it's easy. You earn $500 every single year. Year 1, year 2, year 3. After 3 years, you've got $1,500 total interest. Your balance is $11,500.
Right. Consistent $500.
But with compound interest, year 1 is the same. You earned $500. Your balance is $10,500.
Okay.
But in year 2, you earn 5% not just on the original $10,000, but on the $10,500. So you earn $525 interest in year 2. Your balance is now $11,025.
That's slightly more.
And then in year 3, you earn 5% on that $11,025, which is $551.25. So your total interest over 3 years is $500 plus $525 plus $551.25. Your final balance is $11,576.25.
Okay, so that difference, $76.25 over just 3 years. Seems kind of small initially, maybe.
It does seem small there, yeah. But that difference, that little extra bit earned each year, it compounds exponentially over decades. It creates this huge chasm between the two investments eventually.
Right. The sources showed that 10-year example, didn't they? Mr. Santos invests $100,000 at 6% annually. Compounded, the total interest earned was nearly $80,000.
$79,084.77 to be exact.
Right. But if that had been simple interest, the total interest would have only been $100,000, 6%, 10 years, just $60,000.
Exactly. That $19,000, $20,000 difference, that is purely the power of interest earning more interest.
Wow.
And this power gets even more intense when you factor in compounding frequency. This is something every saver, and every borrower too, absolutely must pay attention to.
Okay.
If the stated nominal annual rate is fixed, let's say it's 12% per year, the more frequently the interest is calculated and added back to the principal, say monthly versus quarterly versus just annually, the greater the total amount of interest you actually earn.
Wait, I need to pause there. If the nominal rate is 12% per year, why does it actually matter if it's compounded monthly or quarterly? Shouldn't the math just kind of equalize at the end of the year? 12% is 12%, isn't it?
Ah, good question.
Yeah.
But no, it doesn't equalize. The difference comes down to the opportunity to reinvest the interest sooner. Think about it.
Yep.
If it compounds quarterly, the interest that gets added in March, it doesn't start earning its own interest until the next quarter begins in April.
Right.
But if it compounds monthly, the interest added in January starts earning its own little bit of interest already in February. That slightly earlier start, that acceleration month after month, is what drives the total amount higher and pushes the effective rate up.
Okay, that makes sense. It's about getting the interest working for you faster.
Precisely. And this brings us straight to that crucial distinction between the rate you see advertised and the rate you actually get. The nominal rate versus the effective annual rate, EAR.
Right, the nominal rate. That's just the headline figure, the 12% that grabs your attention on the advertisement.
Exactly. It's the stated annual rate before considering the effect of compounding frequency. The EER, on the other hand, is the actual true rate you earn or pay annually after you factor in how often it's compounded. It's the ultimate metric for making fair comparisons.
So using that example we saw earlier, if you take a 12% nominal rate, but it's compounded monthly, the resulting EER is actually 12.68%.
Correct. That extra 0.68%, that's the hidden gain if you're saving or the hidden cost if you're borrowing, due entirely to the monthly compounding.
And I guess that 0.68% difference, while it sounds small, could absolutely swing the profitability of, say, multi-million-dollar investments or loans.
Oh, absolutely. When a company is evaluating a major project, they must use the EER as their required rate of return or their discount rate, not just the nominal rate, because the EER truly reflects the actual market opportunity cost of capital. And here's a key rule. The effective annual rate is always greater than the nominal rate whenever compounding occurs more frequently than just once per year. Hashtag tag 2.2, time value of money, TVM, future value, FV, present value, PV.
Okay, so now that we've really got our heads around compounding, we can transition to what is probably the single most foundational concept in all of finance, the time value of money, or TVM.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds complex, but the core idea is actually simple, yet really profound, isn't it? Money you have today is inherently more valuable than the exact same amount of money received sometime in the future.
That's absolutely true. And it's true for, well, mainly two big reasons. First, inflation. Over time, money generally loses purchasing power. $1 today buys more than $1 will in 10 years.
Right, cost of living goes up.
And second, opportunity cost. Money you have today could be invested today to start earning a return. Money you don't receive until later represents a lost opportunity to earn that return in the meantime.
Okay, so how do we actually quantify this TVM concept? We use two sort of inverse processes, right? First is future value, FV.
Exactly. FV is basically the compounding we've just been discussing. It's calculating how much a present amount of money will grow into at some point in the future, assuming it earns a certain rate of return. The formula is $5 P1 plus I in dollars.
So if you're saving for retirement, for example, you're doing an FV calculation. You want to know, if I invest $100,000 today at, say, 6% annually for 10 years, what will that be worth then?
Right. And using the formula or a calculator, you find the future value is $179,084.77. You're essentially looking forward in time, projecting growth.
Okay. And the second process, which is often, I think, the more challenging concept for people initially, is present value, PV.
Yeah.
And this uses the inverse process called discounting.
Yes, discounting. It's the process of taking a future value and amount of money you expect to receive later and converting it into its equivalent value today. The formula is basically the FV formula rearranged, PP F1 plus I10.
So we're essentially removing the assumed compound interest and the opportunity cost that would have hypothetically accrued between now and that future date.
That's a great way to put it, yes. We're stripping out the time value component to see what that future sum is worth in today's terms.
But why do we really need to do this? I mean, if a reliable client promises to pay me $50,000 7 years from now, why can't I just mentally book that as $50,000? Why discount it?
Because that future $50,000 simply doesn't have the same economic value as $50,000 in your hand right now.
Okay.
First, again, inflation will likely erode its purchasing power over those 7 years. But more importantly, from a financial perspective, you can't invest that $50,000 today. If you have other opportunities right now to invest money and earn, let's say, a 6% return, then that future $50,000 has to be penalized or discounted by that 6% opportunity cost for every one of the 7 years you have to wait.
Oh, okay. So that 6% discount rate, it's acting like that time tax again, or maybe a penalty for having to wait for the money. And the higher the discount rate, maybe because market rates are high or the investment is risky, the less that future cash is actually worth to me today.
It's exactly right. And here's the absolute key insight for any kind of business valuation or investment analysis. If your required discount rate increases, maybe because risk goes up, or maybe because alternative market opportunities just get better, then the present value of any given future cash amount decreases, potentially significantly.
Why significantly?
Because you're discounting that future cash flow more heavily for each year you have to wait. The impact of the discount rate compounds over time, just like interest does.
Got it. So in our example, that $50,000 promised in 7 years, assuming maybe a modest 6% discount rate, you're saying it's only worth $33,252.86 today.
According to the PV formula, yes. Pre-PO of $50,000, 1 plus 0.6467 gives you $33,252.86.
Wow. So the other, nearly $17,000? That's essentially...
You're right.
Precisely. That $16,747.14 represents the time value of money over those 7 years at that rate. And understanding this discounting logic is absolutely fundamental to, well, pretty much all business valuation and investment decision-making.
Okay, so we see this combined power of compounding and discounting applied literally every day in how long-term debt is structured, don't we? Specifically with things like annuities and amortization.
Absolutely. Annuities in finance are simply defined as a stream of regular, equal payments made over a defined period of time.
Right, like mortgages, car loans, even regular contributions to a savings plan can be thought of as annuities.
Exactly. And when you take out a typical loan, like a mortgage, the math behind it involves finding the present value of that annuity stream, which is the loan amount you receive up front, and then determining the fixed periodic payment amount that's required to pay off both the principal and all the compound interest over the specified loan term.
And this whole repayment process is usually laid out visually in the amortization schedule, right?
Correct. The amortization schedule or table.
And looking at one of those schedules is actually fascinating because it visually represents the often crushing reality of compound interest when you're the one borrowing.
Mm-hmm.
It shows exactly how each of those fixed scheduled payments you make is split between actually reducing your principal balance versus just covering the interest expense for that period.
And here's the really crucial observation you'll always see when reviewing these schedules. In the early payments on a loan, a massive chunk, often the majority of your payment, goes straight towards interest.
Yeah, it's depressing sometimes.
It can be. But as the years pass, the portion of your fixed payment going to interest rapidly decreases. And correspondingly, the portion going toward principal reduction increases dramatically.
Why exactly does that happen? The payment amount stays the same each month or each year, yet the internal split changes so drastically over time.
It's purely a mathematical consequence tied directly back to how interest is calculated. In year one of the loan, interest is calculated based on the full original outstanding loan balance. It's at its highest point.
Okay.
But for every year after that, the interest is calculated on the decreasing beginning balance of the loan for that year. As you pay down principal, the base on which interest is calculated shrinks.
Right. Let's look at that source example again. A $100,000 loan at 12% interest over 3 years. It required annual payments of $41,634.90.
Mm-hmm.
In year one, the interest is calculated on the full $100,000. So 12% of $100K is $12,000. That means $12,000 of your first $41,634 payment just poof goes to interest.
Exactly. That's nearly 29% of your payment just covering the cost of capital for that first year. Only the remaining amount, about $29,634, actually reduces your debt.
Okay. But by the time you get to year three, the beginning balance has shrunk considerably, hasn't it? It's down to $37,160.88.
Much less than the $12,000 in year one.
Much less. And since the borrower is still paying that same fixed amount, $41,664.88, the money saved on interest, that difference between the $12,000 interest in year one and the $4,460 interest in year three is now entirely dedicated to hammering down the remaining principal. In year three, over $37,000 of the payment goes to principal reduction. So this really highlights that any extra dollar you can manage to pay towards principal, especially in the early years of a loan, has this outsized, almost exponential impact, doesn't it?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Because that early principal reduction saves you from paying interest on that specific amount, not just for this year, but for every single subsequent year of the loan's remaining term.
It's like the difference between trying to push a giant snowball up a steep hill initially versus once you get it over the crest and it starts rolling downhill, gathering speed on its own.
That's a great analogy. The heavy interest burden on the large balance early on feels like you're pushing uphill. But once that balance drops significantly, the principal reduction really accelerates almost automatically with each fixed payment. It clearly shows that compounding works against you when you borrow, and every single effort you make to reduce that principal base early on multiplies your savings down the road.
Okay, we've really built the foundation now. We've got the simple debt mechanics, we understand the incredible power of compounding, and crucially, the time value of money. Now, I think we're ready to actually use this more advanced knowledge for, well, strategic decision-making.
Exactly.
We're shifting focus now from maybe personal loans or savings to the kind of metrics that big businesses use to decide whether to greenlight major, often multi-million-dollar long-term investments.
Precisely. In the corporate finance world, the challenge is always comparing the initial investment costs with the projected returns, which often stretch out over many, many years. And you have to do this using a specific required rate of return that reflects the company's risk and opportunity cost.
Right.
So we generally start with let's say, the quickest and simplest metric, and then we progress to the ones that are more complex, maybe, but also far superior for making sound decisions. So we begin with return on investment, or ROI. Everyone's probably heard of this one. It's fundamentally just a measure of simple profitability compared against the initial cost.
Yeah, it's fast, seems easy to calculate, and it gives you a number that feels immediately understandable.
Right. It really only focuses on the final total return, and it expresses it as a simple percentage.
And the formula couldn't be much simpler, could it? It's basically total revenue minus total costs minus the initial investment, all divided by the initial investment, then times 100 to get a percentage.
That's it. And the interpretation is straightforward. A positive ROI means the investment generated more profit than it cost. A negative ROI means it was, well, a flop financially.
Let's apply that example from the source material. A company invests, say, $50,000 to launch some new product. Over the product's entire lifetime, it generates $75,000 in total revenue, but it also incurs $15,000 in various operating costs.
Okay, so first step, revenue minus costs gives you a kind of gross profit. $75,000, $15,000, and $60,000.
Right. Then you subtract the initial $50,000 investment from that $60,000 profit, which means the actual net gain, the pure profit, is $10,000.
Correct. Now, for the final ROI calculation, you divide that $10,000 net gain by the $50,000 initial investment.
Which gives 0.2.
And multiply by 100. So the ROI is 20%.
Okay. And the interpretation is for every single dollar the company invested, it got back an additional $1.20 in net profit over the life of the project.
Exactly.
Now, on the surface, that sounds like a pretty decent project, right? A 20% return. If ROI is so simple and fast, why do businesses really need to bother with the added complexity of things like NPV and IRR? Why shouldn't, say, a small business owner just stick with ROI for their decisions?
That is the absolutely essential, critical question here.
Uh-huh.
ROI, despite its simplicity, has a potentially catastrophic flaw, especially when you're looking at long-term planning.
Which is?
It completely, utterly ignores the time value of money.
Everything we just spent time establishing in Section 2.
Exactly. ROI doesn't care when the profits come in. It gives you the same 20% answer whether that $10,000 net gain took 1 year to achieve or if it took 20 years to trickle in.
Right. And if the project actually took 20 years to generate that 20% total return, your actual annualized return would be absolutely abysmal, wouldn't it? Probably less than inflation.
Precisely. The project might look good on a simple ROI basis, but in reality, it could have been a terrible use of capital over that long time frame because it didn't account for opportunity cost or inflation.
Okay, so ROI is maybe fine for evaluating something really short-term, like a one-off advertising campaign maybe, or just a simple inventory purchase and sales cycle.
Yes, for very short-term, simple payback scenarios, it can be adequate.
But for anything more substantial, like building a new factory that's going to generate uneven cash flows over, say, a decade or more, ROI becomes almost meaningless or even dangerously misleading.
Exactly. It creates this inherent risk of systematically overvaluing long-term projects that might have slow returns, while potentially undervaluing shorter-term projects with quicker paybacks. And that is precisely why smart businesses, especially for significant investments, absolutely must transition to metrics that are properly time-adjusted, which makes net present value, NPV, the undisputed gold standard.
Okay, NPV. This sounds like where we truly have to utilize everything we just learned about discounting and present value back in Section 2.
Absolutely. NPV directly and explicitly considers the time value of money. It does this by calculating the total value of all the expected future cash flows from a project, but it values them in today's money.
So it's forcing us to ask that crucial question. Are the future cash benefits we expect to get from this project, after we adjust them downwards for inflation and our opportunity cost, still greater than the initial cost we have to pay out today?
That's the exact question NPV answers. And to do it, the calculation requires establishing a specific discount rate, often labeled R.
And that R, that discount rate, that's usually the company's WACC, the weighted average cost of capital, or at least some minimum rate of return they require to justify taking the risk.
Precisely. It represents the hurdle rate, the opportunity cost of investing in this project versus putting the money elsewhere with similar risk.
Okay. And the decision rule for NPV seems pretty rigid and easy to interpret based on the sources.
Very much so. If the calculated NPV is greater than 0, the project is deemed profitable on a time-adjusted basis, and it should be accepted. It implies the project will generate more value than the cost of funding it.
And if the NPV is negative?
Rejected. A negative NPV means the project is expected to destroy value. The present value of the future cash inflows isn't enough to cover the initial investment, considering the required rate of return. It's a net value destroyer.
The calculation process itself seems like the core difficulty here, though. Unlike ROI, which was just one calculation at the end, NPV requires you to individually discount every single expected future cash flow back to its value today, in year 0.
That's correct. It's more work up front. The formula for NPV is essentially the total present value, PV, of all the expected future cash flows, both positive inflows and any negative outflows, minus the initial investment, which occurs at year 0.
So it involves that potentially complex summation of multiple discounted values using that PP-F1 plus RN calculation for every single year's projected cash flow?
Yes. You have to calculate the PV for the year 1 cash flow, the PV for the year 2 cash flow, the PV for the year 3 cash flow, and so on for the entire life of the project, and then sum them all up.
Okay, let's use that multi-year startup investment example from the sources to walk through it. We have an initial investment and outflow of $10,000 right now at year 0.
Yeah.
The company's required rate of return, the discount rate R, is 10%.
Got it.
And the expected cash flows are uneven. A positive inflow of $7,000 in year 1. Another positive inflow of $6,500 in year 2. And then critically, a negative cash flow, maybe a required maintenance cost or something of $1,000 in year 3.
Right. And notice this is exactly the kind of scenario where simple ROI would completely fall apart because it wouldn't know how to handle that year 3 negative cash flow properly within the time context.
Good point.
But with NPV, we just systematically discount each figure back to today using our 10% rate. The $7,000 inflow expected in year 1, its present value today is $7,000. 1 plus 0.111, 1 equals $6,363.64.
Okay.
The $6,500 inflow expected in year 2, its PV today is $6,500, $1.310 NE, 2 equals $5,371.90.
Makes sense.
And yes, even that $1,000 outflow expected in year 3 must also be discounted back to today's terms. So now we sum up the present values of all those future cash flows. The 2 positive TVs minus the 1 negative PV. So $6,363.64 plus $5,371.90, $751.31. That gives a total PV of future flows of $10,984.24.
Exactly. That's a total value in today's dollars of everything expected to happen after the initial investment.
Now for the final NPV calculation, we take that total PV of $10,984.24 and subtract the initial $10,000 investment that happened at year 0. Right? $10,984.24, $10,000 saying $984.24.
So the final net present value is positive $984.24.
Correct.
And since $984.24 is positive, it's greater than 0, the project is accepted.
Yes. This calculation tells the company management that even after factoring in the time it takes to earn that money, and even after demanding a minimum 10% return on their invested capital, this project is still expected to provide an extra $984.24 in pure economic value measured in today's dollars. That's a fundamentally sound investment signal.
And NPV is generally preferred, I gather, partly because the result is an actual dollar value. That makes it easy to interpret and also easy to compare different projects, maybe.
Absolutely. If you have 2 mutually exclusive projects, meaning you can only choose one, and Project A has an NPV of $5 million, while Project B has an NPV of $3 million, assuming similar risk levels and investment sizes, the decision is clear. You take Project A because it creates more absolute dollar value for the firm. Hashtag tag 3.3 internal rate of return.
Higher. Okay. That leads us nicely to the final strategic metric we need to cover, the internal rate of return, or IRR. This is the one that often sounds the most, abstract. But it seems to provide a really crucial benchmark against the firm's own cost of capital.
It does. The IRR is defined, somewhat technically, as the specific discount rate that would make the net present value, NPV, of a particular project equal exactly 0.
Okay, so you're kind of solving for the R in the NPV equation, setting NPV to 0.
That's exactly what you're doing mathematically. You're finding the discount rate at which the present value of all the future cash inflows perfectly equals the initial investment. If you calculate a project's IRR, you are effectively finding the project's expected intrinsic compound rate of return over its entire life. It's like calculating the effective annual yield for the whole investment.
So it acts like a hurdle rate then. The key decision rule for IRR, based on the sources, is if the project's calculated IRR is greater than the company's cost of capital, that minimum required rate of return we use for NPV, then the project is accepted. And if the IRR is lower than the cost of capital, the project actually destroys value relative to the company's other opportunities, so it's rejected.
Precisely. Let's try to connect this back to maybe a project manager's perspective.
Huh.
If your company tells you that its required cost of capital for projects like yours is, say, 10%,
Okay.
and you run the numbers for your proposed project and calculate that its IRR is actually 15%.
Right.
That 5% difference between your project's expected return, 15%, and the minimum required return, 10%, is essentially your safety margin. It's the buffer.
Yeah.
That's why IRR is so valuable as a metric. It quantifies the resilience of the project's expected return. It directly answers the question, how high could my company's cost of capital possibly rise before this specific project stops being profitable?
That's a good way to frame it. It seems like IRR is just kind of an inverse calculation of NTV then, in a way. If the IRR is greater than the required rate, the NTV must be positive. If the IRR is less than the required rate, the NPV must be negative. Are they essentially measuring the exact same thing?
They are very closely related, yes. And they will usually lead to the same accept-reject decision for independent projects. But they do provide slightly different types of insight, which is why both are often calculated.
How so?
Well, NPV, as we said, gives you the absolute dollar value created by the project. That's essential for comparing projects of different sizes or scales, and for maximizing the total value added to the firm. IRR, on the other hand, gives you the percentage return, the rate. That's excellent for quickly benchmarking a project against market interest rates or against internal hurdle rates, and for understanding the relative profitability or efficiency of the capital employed.
Okay. But I feel like I've heard somewhere that sometimes IRR can be a bit misleading or maybe problematic. Are there situations where a finance professional might actually rely more heavily on NPV over IRR, even if the IRR looks good?
Absolutely, yes. While IRR is intuitively appealing because it's a percentage, it definitely can present problems in certain more complex situations. One major issue arises when projects have what we call non-conventional cash flows.
Non-conventional, what does that mean?
It means the cash flows change sign more than once over the project's life. The typical pattern is negative outflow at the start, investment, followed by a series of positive inflows, returns.
Right.
But a non-conventional pattern might be negative outflow investment, then some positive inflows, but then another significant negative outflow later on, maybe for a major refurbishment, or perhaps the mandatory decommissioning cost of a plant at the end of its life in year 10.
Oh, okay. So multiple sign changes. Why is that a problem for IRR?
Because mathematically, in these non-conventional cash flow scenarios, the IRR calculation can actually produce multiple valid IRR results. You might get an IRR of 8% and another one of 25%, both of which make the NPV 0.
Oh, well, that makes the decision rule impossible then, doesn't it? Which IRR do you compare to the cost of capital?
Exactly. It makes the IRR metric completely ambiguous and potentially useless in those specific cases. Another related issue is when comparing mutually exclusive projects of very different scales. A small project might have a very high IRR, say 50%, while a much larger project has a lower IRR, say 20%. IRR alone might tempt you towards the small project, but the larger project, because of its scale, might actually have a vastly higher NPV and add much more total dollar value to the company.
That's a really fascinating and important caveat. So while IRR gives you that powerful benchmark percentage, which is great for a quick feel, NPV, because it calculates the value directly in today's dollars and handles any cash flow pattern cleanly, remains the most robust and theoretically sound metric for comparing projects, especially if they have unusual funding needs down the line or significant differences in scale.
Precisely. NPV ensures you are always comparing apples to apples in terms of the absolute time-adjusted economic value creation. It forces the analyst to confront the true dollar impact of every single cash flow discounted back to the present day. It's generally considered the superior decision criterion when conflicts arise.
Yes.
Hashtag outro.
Okay, so wrapping this all up, what does this whole journey mean for you, the listener? Today, we've really moved quite a distance, haven't we? We started with the very linear mathematics of a simple promissory note where maybe we only needed to worry about the initial principal amount. Then we jumped into the exponential world of compounding, saw how powerful that is, and finally we learned how to use that understanding, specifically discounting, to assess complex, multi-year strategic investments using robust metrics like net present value and even IRR.
Yeah, I think the absolute key takeaway here is really recognizing when the time value of money, that whole process of discounting future values back to the present, is an absolute necessity, versus when a simpler, maybe static profit metric might suffice.
Right.
And the rule of thumb is pretty clear. For Almost any financial decision that extends beyond, say, 1 year, whether that's you personally saving for a house down payment or a corporation deciding whether to build a billion-dollar factory, understanding compounding and applying discounting are non-negotiable foundations for getting an accurate picture of the financial reality.
You probably started this deep dive with just a stack of maybe disconnected definitions and formulas in your head. Hopefully, you now possess a much more integrated understanding of how they all relate and build on each other. We saw that even in simple loans, just the basis of the calculation principle versus maturity value for interest versus discount drastically changes the effective cost to the borrower.
Yeah.
And we saw how compounding literally turns simple addition into powerful multiplication over time.
And this maybe raises an important final question for you, the listener, to think about after we finish. Given what we now understand about the, frankly, devastating implication that the simple ROI metric completely ignores the time value of money, the very engine of compounding and discounting we spent so much time discussing, how might a business that relies too heavily on just basic ROI systematically make bad decisions? For example, how might they undervalue a necessary, maybe safer project that generates lower but quicker returns, while at the same time simultaneously overvaluing a much riskier project that promises huge, flashy returns, but only way out in the distant future, say 20 years down the line?
That's a really interesting thought. It forces you to consider how the metric itself shapes the decision, potentially biasing you towards long-shot bets if you ignore the time factor. It's a stark reminder, isn't it, that the method of calculation you choose really defines the perceived profitability and therefore the reality of your potential investment.
Indeed. Go forth and analyze your opportunities, but do it with time-adjusted precision.